Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, context is everything. This is John Michael Monroy, founder and CEO of the Context is Everything Media Network. I'm here for another installment of episode 41, The Ambient Classroom. Ambient Classroom. Reading this textbook cover to cover to build my historical context, because if I'm going to be talking about anything, shouldn't the listener trust that I at least try to understand the world around me, right? Well, I'm proving that I'm trying to understand the world around me by reading a textbook entirely. And there's evidence of it because I'm doing it live on a television right now, here. Well, you can watch it on a television if you like. That's completely up to you. Yesterday, I started using these little booklets to write my notes rather than a sticky note, because I'm noticing, not that I'm taking lengthy notes, but fitting it all on a small dollar store sticky note is not easy. These are notes from the previous section. So here we go. Chapter 8, Section 1, the Early Middle Ages, from 500 to 1080. That's the early Middle Ages, not the Middle Ages in a whole, I think. Europe is getting its wings by way of blending Greco-Roman, Germanic, and Christian traditions. Medieval means the Latin word for Middle Age, medieval Latin word for Middle Age. Much of Europe outside of the Mediterranean nations were frontier land, not very well established land. Between 400 and 700, the Germanic tribes carved Western Europe into many tribes, the strongest of which were the Franks. In 486, the Frank king Clovis conquered Gaul, which is now France. Islam is created in 622. That's when it dawned. That's the Prophet Muhammad in Arabia. Muslims began conquests around their surrounding area in Palestine, North Africa, and then even all the way to Spain. When they reached France, they were defeated by Charles Martel at the Battle of Tours in 732. Christians viewed Muslims as hostile. Charlemagne, who's Charles the Great, is Charles Martel's grandson. He had a 46-year reign, and his kingdom reached from France to Germany to parts of Italy. He fought off Muslims, Saxons, Avars, Slavs, and Lombards. Nobles he appointed all around for local regions, and he also had, even on a smaller scale, Missi Dominici, which were the eyes and ears of the empire. Charlemagne revived learning and education ethics and founded a school at Aachen, Aachen, under direction of Alcuin of York, with focus on Latin tradition study. That would be grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. This is the system for medieval education henceforth. After Charlemagne's death in 814, his empire split into thirds, and that split happened in 843 in the Treaty of Verdun. Now, we're going to probably talk about Vikings, because that's how that last section ended. Started saying something about Vikings. The Rise of Europe, Chapter 8. Section 2, Feudalism. Guess we're not talking about Vikings yet. And the Manor economy. Setting the scene. Count William had just inherited the rich lands of Flanders. The local nobles gathered to pledge loyalty to their new lord. One by one, they knelt before him and took a solemn oath. I promise on my faith, pledged each lord, that I will in future be faithful to Count William and will observe my loyalty to him completely against all persons in good faith and without deceit. The Count then touched the noble with a small rod. With this gesture, he granted the noble a parcel of land, which included any towns, castles, or people in it. Although the words might vary, ceremonies like this one took place across Europe during the Middle Ages. In public, before witnesses, great nobles and lesser lords exchanged vows of loyalty and service. Those vows were part of a new political and social system that governed medieval life. The emergence of feudalism. In the face of invasion by Vikings, Muslims, and Magyars, kings and emperors were too weak to maintain law and order. People needed protection from themselves, their homes, and their lands. In respect to basic need for protection, a new system evolved, known as feudalism. Feudalism was a loosely organized system of rule in which powerful local lords divided their land holdings among lesser lords. In exchange, these lesser lords, or vassals, pledged service and loyalty to the greater lord. Okay. Subheading under emergence of feudalism. Mutual obligations. The relationship between lords and vassals was established by customs and traditions, and by exchange of pledges known as the feudal contract. The lord granted his vassals a fief, or estate. Fiefs ranged from few acres to hundreds of square miles. In addition to land itself, the fief included peasants to work the land, as well as any towns or buildings on the land. As part of the feudal contract, the lord promised to protect his vassal. In return, the vassal pledged loyalty to his lord. He also agreed to provide the lord with 40 days of military service each year, certain money payments, and advice. Subheading under emergence of feudalism. A structured society. Everyone had a place in feudal society. Below the monarch were powerful lords, such as dukes and counts, who held the largest fiefs. Each of these lords had vassals, and these vassals in turn had their own vassals. And in many cases, the same man was both vassal and lord. Vassal to a more powerful lord above him, and lord to a less powerful vassal below him. Confusing, but also I get it, I think. Because vassals often held fiefs from more than one lord, feudal relationships grew very complex. A vassal who had pledged loyalty to several lords could have serious problems if his overlords quarreled with each other. What was he to do if both demanded his aid? To solve this problem, a vassal usually had a liege lord. A liege. Liege. What was he to do if both demanded his aid? To solve this problem, a vassal usually had a liege lord, to whom he owed his first loyalty, my liege. The world of nobles. Heading. The world of nobles. For feudal nobles, warfare was a way of life. Rival lords battled constantly for power. Many nobles trained from boyhood for a future occupation as a knight or a mounted warrior. Achieving knighthood at the age of 7, a boy slated to become a knight was sent away to a castle of his father's lord. There he learned to ride and fight. He also learned to keep his armor and weapons in good condition. Training was difficult and discipline was strict. Any laziness was punished with an angry blow or even a severe beating. With his training finished, the youth was ready to become a knight. Kneeling before an older knight, he bowed his head. The knight struck the young man with his hand on the flat side of his sword and declared him something like the following. I want to read that again. The knight struck the young man with his hand or the flat side of his sword and declared something like the following. In the name of God, Saint Michael, and Saint George, I dub thee knight. Be valiant. After this dubbing, the young knight took his place beside the warriors. As feudal warfare decreased in the 1100s, tournaments or mock battles came into fashion. A lord would invite knights from the surrounding area to enter contests of fighting skill. Early tournaments were as dangerous as real battles, and captured knights were held for ransom. In time, tournaments acquired more ceremony and ritual. Subheading: Underworlds of Nobles. Castles. During the early Middle Ages, powerful lords fortified their homes to withstand attack. Their strongholds included a keep, or wooden tower, ringed by a fence. The keep was separated from the surrounding area by a moat, or a water-filled ditch. The strongholds gradually became larger and grander. By the 1100s, monarchs and nobles owned sprawling stone castles with high walls, towers, and drawbridges over wide moats. Wars often centered on seizing castles that commanded strategic river crossings, harbors, or mountain passes. Castle dwellers stored up food and water so that they could withstand a long siege. If attackers failed to starve the defender into submission, they might try a tunnel under the castle walls. Noble women. Noble women played active roles. This is a subheading under the world of nobles. Noble women played active roles in this warrior society. While her husband or father was off fighting, the lady of the manor took over his duties. She supervised vassals, managed the household, and performed necessary agricultural and medical tasks. Sometimes she might even have to go to war to defend her estate. A few medieval noblewomen took a hand in politics. For example, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor of Aquitaine inherited lands in southwestern France. Through 2 marriages, she became first Queen of France and later Queen of England. Eleanor was a leading force in European politics for more than 50 years. Women's rights to inheritance were severely restricted under the feudal system. Land usually passed to eldest son in a family. A woman did, however, receive lands as part of her dowry. A fierce negotiation swirled around an unmarried and widowed. A woman did, however, receive land as part of her dowry, and fierce negotiations swirled around an unmarried or widowed heiress. If her husband died before her, a woman regained rights to her land. Like their brothers, the daughters of nobles were sent to friends or relatives for training. Before her parents arranged her marriage, a young woman was expected to know how to spin and weave, and how to supervise servants. A few learned to read and write. As a wife, she was expected to bear many children and be dutiful to her husband. This is still under Lives of the Nobles. Lives of the Nobles. Chivalry. In later Middle Ages, knights adopted a code of conduct called chivalry. Chivalry required knights to be brave, loyal, and true to their word. In warfare, they had to fight fairly. A knight, for example, agreed not to attack another knight before the opponent had a chance to put on his armor. Chivalry also dictated that warriors treat a captured knight well, or even release him if he promised to pay his ransom. Chivalry had limits, though. It applied to nobles only, not to commoners. In theory, if not always in practice, chivalry placed women on a pedestal. The code of chivalry called for women to be protected and cherished. Troubadours, or wandering poets, adopted this view. Their love songs praised the perfection, beauty, and wit of women. Much later, ideas of chivalry would shape Western ideas of romantic love. Peasants and manor life. New heading: Peasants and manor life. The heart of the medieval economy was the manor, or lord's estate. Most manors included one or more villages and the surrounding lands. Peasants, who made up the majority of the population in medieval society, lived and worked on the manor. Most peasants on a manor were serfs, bound to the land. Serfs were not slaves who could be bought and sold. Still, they were not free. They could not leave the manor without the lord's permission. If the manor was granted a new lord, the serfs went along with it. Subheading under Peasants and manor life: Mutual obligations. Peasants and their lords were tied together by mutual rights and obligations. Peasants had to work several days a week farming the lord's land. They also repaired his roads, bridges, and fences. Peasants paid the lord a fee when they married, when they inherited their father's acres, or when they used a local mill to grind grain. Other payments fell due at Christmas and Easter. Because money had largely disappeared from medieval Europe, they paid with products such as grain, honey, eggs, and chickens. In return for a lifetime of labor, peasants had the right to farm several acres for themselves. They were also entitled to the lord's protection from Viking raids and feudal warfare, although they could not leave the manor. Okay? Although they could not leave the manor freely, they could also not be forced off it. In theory, at least, they were guaranteed food, housing, and land. Subheading under Peasants and Manor life: A self-sufficient world. The manor was generally self-sufficient. That is, peasants produced almost everything they needed, from food and clothing to simple furniture and tools. Most peasants never ventured more than a few miles from their village. They had no schooling and no knowledge of a larger world outside. A typical manor included a few dozen one-room huts clustered close together in a village. Nearby stood water mill to grind grain, a tiny church, and the manor house. The fields surrounding the village were divided into narrow strips. Each family had strips of land in different fields, so that good land and bad land were shared evenly. Peasant life, subheading. Final subheading of the section. For most peasants, life was harsh. Men, women, and children worked long hours from sunup to sundown. During planting season, a man might guide an ox-drawn plow through the fields, while his wife walked alongside, goading the ox into motion with a pointed stick. Children helped plant seeds, weeded, and took care of pigs and sheep. The peasant family ate a simple diet of black bread with vegetables such as peas, cabbage, turnips, or onions. They seldom had meat unless they poached wild game on their lord's manor. At the risk of harsh punishment, Also, if they poached wild game, they could get punished. Interesting. If they lived near the river, a meal might include fish. At night, the family and any cows, chickens, pigs, or sheep slept together in their one-room hut. Like farmers everywhere, European peasants worked according to the season. In spring and autumn, they plowed and harvested. In summer, they hayed. At other times, they weeded, repaired fences, and performed chores. In the late winter, when the harvest was exhausted and new crops had not yet ripened, hunger was common. Disease took a heavy toll, and few peasants lived beyond the age of 35. Wow, so few of them lived beyond 35. Wow. Finally, still peasants found occasion to celebrate, such as marriages and births. Welcome breaks came at Christmas and Easter, when peasants had a week off from work. Dozens of other festivals in Christian calendar brought days off. At these times, people might butcher an animal so that they could feast on meat. There would also be dancing and rough sports, from wrestling to ball games. Okay, not bad. That is the feudal system in a nutshell. Pretty quick, concise. Vassals, all of them. Chivalry, troubadours. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. And remember, context is everything. This construction is going to be excellent when it's finished. Bye-bye.